everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are here for the first time. I'm Laura, this is Culture Nonsense, and for those of you who are returning, yes, I have changed my background for the millionth time. Anyway, we're going to get into Elizabeth Holmes' testimony during her cross-examination on Tuesday, November 30th. I would like this video to be shorter, but every time I say that, I end up shooting myself in the foot and making a long video, so we'll see what happens. One of the first things that happened Tuesday morning, of course, was an argument between attorneys. The defense and the prosecution were talking about what evidence should be allowed in regard to Elizabeth Holmes' lavish lifestyle. There was a bit of a compromise made where the judge said they couldn't talk about specific brands or indulgences she had, but if there was something in her lifestyle as related to the CEO that might counter some of the testimony she'd given in terms of why she wanted to be CEO. She's talking about all of the benevolent things that she wanted to do, and the prosecution wants to make an argument that, look, she got to fly around in private jets, and she bought a $9 million home, and she got to meet all these rich and famous people, and that was the motivation behind her wanting to keep Theranos alive, not just to help people. The cross-examination itself started out with prosecutor Robert Leach talking about the Wall Street Journal reporting. A lot of the testimony on Tuesday focused on the text messages in between Elizabeth and Sonny, and so here we got an example where they were talking about getting ahead of the story by John Carreyrou. The messages showed Ms. Holmes and Mr. Balwani discussing intervening with Mr. Carreyrou's blood test at a Theranos testing center, which was a part of his reporting, and in another exchange, they were making fun of him for being French, and another showed them surmising who Mr. Carreyrou's sources were. Mr. Leach asked Ms. Holmes about her plan to get ahead of the journal story. She responded that she didn't know what that meant. The text frequently discussed plans to get ahead of the story, and she kept refusing to acknowledge that she was trying to get ahead of the story. The prosecution kept bringing up multiple text messages asking, does this refresh your memory? And she said, it does not. And when Mr. Leach asked if she was worried that Carreyrou would get a venous draw at a Walgreens Wellness Center, Holmes says, I don't remember that. So it seems like she's just kind of denying her memory so that it seems like there wasn't any involvement. She said, we were certainly actively engaged with Mr. Carreyrou. We were very worried about Mr. Carreyrou's story. She said her worry was that the story would disclose Theranos trade secrets. Mr. Carreyrou is of course still following this case, so he was in the courtroom, and when he was asked for a comment about this by a reporter, not by any of the attorneys, he said, I told the story about how Elizabeth Holmes tried to quash my reporting and ruthlessly retaliated against my sources in my book, Bad Blood. I stand by every line of what I wrote. There was a bit of talk about Erica Chung, who testified earlier. If you'd like to see that, it's in this video here. Ms. Holmes confirmed that she hired Boyes Schiller Flexner LLP, but she said it was to ensure that Ms. Chung wasn't disclosing trade secrets. And Ms. Holmes said that in hindsight, the company should have taken seriously Ms. Chung's concerns about Theranos' blood testing technology. Ms. Chung said in her testimony that she alerted the main US lab regulator about problems she perceived in Theranos' lab, which led to a government inspection that found major deficiencies in Theranos' clinical lab. Leach asked, Erica Chung was right about the issues being raised about the 3.5, which was a Theranos device. And Ms. Holmes said, I don't think she was right. But I sure as hell wish we had treated her differently and listened to her. Sure. You don't think the CMS report vindicates her in any way? In a way it does. But Theranos chose not to listen to her at the time. And Ms. Holmes said, my understanding was that we did listen to her, but the team identified the issues that she had identified and they weren't. This quote got a little messed up. She's essentially saying that we talked to her, but the things that she identified as mistakes weren't correctly identified. And after more back and forth like this, Ms. Holmes finally conceded that Ms. Chung was right. And the attorney said, you know, today that she was right, isn't that fair? And she said yes. There was a similar back and forth over whether Theranos retaliated against Chung. Ms. Holmes said, I knew our lawyers were following up with her to stop disclosing trade secret information. And then the prosecutor says, you keep injecting that concept of trade secrets into your answers, and we'll get to that. Ms. Holmes also said, I think I mishandled the entire process of the Wall Street Journal reporting. So a lot of cagey answers, or it took her a long time to finally admit that there was actual, wrongdoing on her part. I was actually really surprised that Elizabeth maintained that Erica Chung wasn't right in some way, seeing as how there was a report that validated things, but I think she's still just kind of believing some of her own delusions. There was also talk about retaliation against Tyler Schultz, who was another whistleblower. There was an email shown to the court. Ms. Holmes had referred to both Ms. Chung and Mr. Schultz as low-level disgruntled employees, and she said in testimony that she wished she had treated them better. We actually saw an email from Mr. Balwani to Tyler Schultz and Elizabeth Holmes calling Tyler's concerns about Theranos' lab problems arrogant, patronizing, and reckless. And actually, we saw edits that Ms. Holmes made to the email to Schultz, and she told Balwani to make his chastising comments to Schultz stronger. So she fully knew that the response to Tyler Schultz was, stop looking into this, you're being annoying, and she requested that it would be even stronger of a rebuke. I guess she was answering a lot of questions regarding Tyler Schultz, George Schultz, and their law firm, the, lawyer intimidation, shakedown, whatever you want to call it, signed the NDA, where they ambushed Tyler at his grandpa's house. She just said, I don't remember, a bunch of times. And then, of course, the prosecution brings up a lot of text messages to refresh her memory. Ms. Holmes rejected the assertion by prosecutors that Theranos sought to retaliate against Ms. Chung and Mr. Schultz or intimidate them with threats of litigation. She also disputed that her lawyer ambushed Mr. Schultz and pressured him to sign documents that would have disclosed the names of other journal sources. That's not my memory of it, Ms. Holmes said. My memory was that it was to stop disclosing trade secrets to the journal. Again with the trade secrets nonsense. Furthering this vein of trying to quash the story, Elizabeth actually went directly to the Wall Street Journal's owner, Rupert Murdoch, in September of 2015, about a month before the journal published its first article on Theranos' problems. Ms. Holmes emailed Mr. Murdoch according to an exhibit shown in court. Her email included a briefing document that was sent from David to Gerald at the Wall Street Journal today in the hopes that Gerald might meet with our team, and David refers to David Boies, her attorney, and Gerard, I think I said Gerald earlier, it's Gerard Baker, the editor-in-chief of the journal at the time. She wrote to Mr. Murdoch that she also attached to the email the material Theranos shared with the reporter John Carreyrou. Mr. Boies had also previously met with Mr. Carreyrou, his editor and a lawyer at the journal's newsroom in New York, and threatened litigation in letters. As I've reflected on this, I thought that were I in your shoes, I would want to know / be in the loop on this one. Ms. Holmes wrote to Mr. Murdoch, we are very much hoping that Gerard will meet with our team. If you have any thoughts on this, please let me know. So for those of you who don't remember, Rupert Murdoch was also an investor in Theranos. He invested $125 million. So he had a little bit of a personal stake if Theranos was going to go down. Regardless, Elizabeth trying to go to the owner of the Wall Street Journal to stop this reporting is pretty ridiculous. She testified that she contacted him again in October of 2015 after the first investigative article was published, and the journal would go on to publish many more articles about Theranos. She said, I couldn't say it more strongly. The way we handled the Wall Street Journal process was a disaster. We totally messed it up. There's a back and forth here between the attorneys and Ms. Holmes. You tried to intimidate Mr. Carreyrou? I don't think so. You tried to quash the story? We did. You had David Boies go to the Wall Street Journal office and threaten litigation? I don't know if he threatened litigation. When none of that worked, you personally went to the owner of the Wall Street Journal to get him to quash the story? I did. Again, she's not really owning up to some things until a lot of pressure is applied by the prosecution. There was also a lot of talk about Elizabeth's role at Theranos as the CEO and how essentially the buck stopped with her, and she said that she felt that was true. She had a 51% stake in the company, and with majority control, she had the power to hire and fire anyone working for the company, including marketing firms, attorneys, and lab directors. She was also in a position to single-handedly add and remove board directors. This is just going towards the argument that at the end of the day, she was in charge of everything that happened at Theranos, and it's not like Sunny was some puppet master. Speaking of Sunny, we finally get to some more romantic text messages between the two of them, and I've just gotta say, obviously I want her to have some more punishment than this, but if there were a punishment, having to publicly read the sappy and frankly sometimes just over-the-top messages between you and your ex-boyfriend in a court and have tons of newspapers and people like me reporting about them is a pretty It's pretty bad punishment in and of itself, but not enough for her, of course. So Elizabeth, like I said, had to read a lot of these messages, and she was crying during a lot of them and continued to be very emotional during this part. In one message shown, Mr. Balwani wrote to Ms. Holmes, "Love you. I prayed from the bottom of my heart for you. I have never prayed with this intensity in my life for anything." Ms. Holmes responded with, "I love this," and "My Nirvana." In another exchange in 2015, Mr. Balwani texted, "You are God's tigress and warrior. You are extraordinary." "Coming from my tiger means the whole universe to me," Ms. Holmes responded. "I love you. I worship you," Mr. Balwani wrote. "Be yourself." They sent additional texts in which they repeated they loved each other. Apparently the word love appears 554 times in the approximate 12,000 text messages. Again, more reports of Elizabeth crying, and Mr. Leach keeps asking her, "Is this another example of Mr. Balwani being loving and supportive to you?" And she says yes. And so this was happening many times, and I just feel like the whole vibe of this in the courtroom at that moment would be pretty uncomfortable. I'd be uncomfy. The pair also repeatedly would text each other a prayer in Arabic, or really just the acronym for it, HMFR, which Ms. Holmes translated to, "This too is my God's glory." Ms. Holmes testified that at the time she thought they had a spiritual connection, and she believed that God put him in her life in a time that it mattered. In another text, Ms. Holmes and Mr. Balwani talk about her going to visit a friend alone without him. And Mr. Leach actually proposed this as an example of Mr. Balwani being a loving partner, but Ms. Holmes shot back, "I think it's me asking him for permission to see my friends." So Ms. Holmes testified that she would have to ask Mr. Balwani if she could visit friends between work meetings. So I don't know if I want to call that a misstep in the prosecution's questioning, but they did allow her another opportunity to say, "This is how Sunny was controlling towards me." In another batch of text messages, we also see some of the examples that I touched on in a previous video a couple months ago when these messages were first released that show Sunny deferring to Elizabeth. So some of these messages touch on issues like Theranos' need to generate more revenue, build and ship its products, and improve its leadership. In one message from 2015, Mr. Balwani told Ms. Holmes he was concerned about the company claiming on its website that it could perform all its proprietary tests with a fingerstick of blood. In another from 2015, Mr. Balwani said Theranos would need a long-term hybrid solution that involved both traditional needle in the arm blood draws tested on commercial machines and Theranos' fingerstick tests. "You agree he's being open about that here?" Prosecutor Robert Leach asked Ms. Holmes on the witness stand. "Yes." "He's not deceiving you?" "No," she replied. It was an exchange that they repeated many times during this part of the testimony. And in another text shown in court, Mr. Balwani told Ms. Holmes that she was getting too much media coverage for the company. "He's not hiding from you his view that he thought Theranos was overexposed without solid substance," said Mr. Leach. "Correct," Ms. Holmes replied. Holmes texted Balwani that media coverage is why we're getting AmeriCare, which I'm assuming is a business deal, but on the stand, Ms. Holmes said she doesn't know what that's referencing. Again, I think she's probably just lying. Another Balwani text where he says, "And yes, I do dislike the direction you have taken with all this PR and all this legal work and a lot of other things." Mr. Leach showed a text in which Mr. Balwani also expressed anger about the state of Theranos in 2015, saying he'd wasted his time at the company. He texted her that he also held himself responsible for decisions made at Theranos. Mr. Leach asked, "And they were your decisions too?" "Yes," she said. "Because you're the CEO?" "Exactly," she said. So even from Elizabeth's own testimony the other day, she said that Sunny was not controlling her business decisions at Theranos, and we can see here there are numerous examples where he expresses displeasure or discontent at how things are going, and she ignores his advice if she wants to, you know? When he said, maybe we should step back from this PR because I don't think we can actually say all the things we're saying, she kind of said too bad and went ahead and did it anyway. It really seems like this abuse argument is just a way for jurors to maybe feel sorry for her, because from what I see and from what she said, it doesn't seem like there's any tangible evidence to support how his influence would affect or make an impact on her decision-making for the company. We also get a little insight into their personal life when we see they created an LLC with that acronym for that prayer HMFR, and they used that LLC to buy their home, which was in a very expensive area, and they bought it for $9 million. It's about an acre of property and is a house with a swimming pool of about 6,800 square feet. So yet another example of how, as a CEO, she was allowed to live a lavish lifestyle. And for those of you who are wondering why they created an LLC to buy this, I think it probably has to do with the fact that they were not married. They each had a 50-50 stake in the house. So I think if they went their separate ways, which they eventually did, it would be easier to get out of than a mortgage that they were on together. Also, I believe there are some tax benefits, maybe, I don't know. There was also talk about how discrediting the Wall Street Journal's original reporting and reference to the Edison was misleading. That is, Elizabeth responded to her board of directors and made comments to try to diminish the reporting that had been done. And she said, oh, he's talking about an older version of the Edison, but really we're using this one now. And it turns out that in fact they were using the version of the Edison that John Carreyrou was talking about. So she admits that some of the things she said were misleading when she was trying to defend Theranos initially after some of this reporting came out. There was also a very weird question that came up and was not touched on enough, in my opinion, because apparently starting in 2010 for some unspecified amount of time, Elizabeth Holmes was in another brief relationship, and she'd mentioned before that she and Sonny had a relatively on again, off again, or there were some breaks in their relationship, so I'm not sure if this is when that occurred, but the prosecutor phrased the question from 2010 to 2015, and she said that it was a shorter time period than that, but I guess she did have some other type of romantic relationship for some amount of time, maybe when she was with Sonny, maybe when they were on a break, but if he truly were very controlling and tried to control every aspect of her life, I highly doubt he would have allowed her to have a little romantic fling on the side. So, like I said, there were really only one or two questions about it and they just moved on and didn't explain. And finally, the last thing we're going to talk about for today is the doctored Schering-Plough and Pfizer reports again. I guess there was another one involved for GlaxoSmithKline PLC as well. Ms. Holmes never informed the companies that she added the logos, and she never told Walgreens that she did that as well. She sent all of these reports to Walgreens executives. And I guess she also removed and added wording from the documents to make them appear as if Pfizer and Schering-Plough had a hand in preparing them. She still thinks apparently that the reports are independent due diligence, which I don't see how that's the case. She said, I think this was accurately reflecting the data in the document. She added, I wish I'd handled this differently. Interestingly enough, prosecutor Robert Leach showed copies of the research contracts that Theranos had with the pharmaceutical companies, which prohibited the use of their logos without their permission. And he said, you didn't look at the contracts to make sure it was okay to do that? I did not, Ms. Holmes said. Not only did Holmes add the Pfizer logo to the report, which Theranos prepared, but she says she probably deleted the header, prepared for Dr. Aiden Power, Pfizer Inc. Because if that had stayed on there, it would have been clear that this was not a Pfizer document. It was prepared for Pfizer to look at and maybe confirm? I don't know. Same thing with the Schering-Plough validation report. Holmes says she probably added the words Schering Corporation, Schering-Plough Research Institute. Again, there was a typo to the top of it. There's also a comment that got deleted in a GSK validation report, which I believe is that company GlaxoSmithKline PLC. And there was a comment deleted about difficulties with the finger prick blood draw. Holmes says she isn't sure who deleted that. And funnily enough, the defense, has thrown legal boilerplate at investors a lot, talking about the fine print and pointing out errors. And Leach is now doing the same thing with Theranos' pharma contracts, which forbid unauthorized use of logos. Throughout this, it's also pretty funny seeing the things that are added or changed in these documents, and this is why you always delete the metadata. Working in the legal field, I had a boss who was very adamant about that, and this is why. They always said, they could bring up examples in the metadata and look through, to see who added this or who changed that, and they can throw it back in your face in court, and that's apparently what they're doing here. Anyway, I believe court is scheduled for 4 days next week. However, the defense says that they might not even need all of that time to wrap up their case. So next week may be the final week of testimony, and hopefully we will get a decision from the jury soon. As fun as making these videos and following this case has been, I really want to know how it's all going to end. So let me know in the comments below what you think. Leave a like if you like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, especially if you would like more updates. That's all for me today, so hope everyone has a great day. See you in my next video. Bye.